just relaxing. I want you all to close your eyes. And just being really comfortable with your body, being natural, and keeping your attention focused on your own sense of self. Very good. Remembering that you are purifiers and that this is the negative high frequency beings event which you are attending in order to purify these influences on our planet. Staying in touch with your body. It doesn't matter if you haven't joined before. And understanding that anything that comes up inside you during this session is something that needs to be purified. You are purifying it. And all you need to do is stay focused on your body. Welcome to the Negative High Frequency Beings event. I'm delighted to have Teresa and Stephen with me once again, who are going to guide us through today's session with a lot more besides. Let's hand over to them straight away and get started.
Well, thank you. This is a real pleasure and privilege for us. No doubt we feel very honored to share this space with you and really always look forward to these. This one had a certain amplitude to it, to say the least.
Oh yes, it's definitely been ramping up in the last few days.
So I guess as a way to kind of open this up, I guess, is to just offer the question, what are negative high frequency beings? What is their agenda? Why are they interacting with our society in the way that they apparently are?
Great. Straight into the core of the matter. I'm going to give 3 purifications today throughout this 2-hour broadcast. And I am going to give 3 very definitive statements, which is for everybody in the group today to purify together with me. After I've given those statements, we're going to go straight into a very powerful purification space, just for a few minutes, because that is all that is really needed, because there is so much now built into the purification space. And as most of you know, my look and my words and my touch are the purification all the way through, and we'll be switching you all on in the same way. We will hold still, and then Stephen and Teresa will unpack the statements that I have just made. All of you remembering to stay very focused on your body during the whole time. So, here we go. In answer to your question, this is statement number 1. Are you ready? There's a race of beings on this planet beneath the surface of the earth. They have a secret weakness. They don't like you and they don't want you here. Actually, they plan to enslave you. And for this, you need to understand the history of the human race, and particularly the story of genetics attached to planet Earth. And you need to bear in mind that very generally, there are 4 main types of life on this planet. There's not just the so-called humans, which we will explain more in a little bit. There are androids. There is a dangerous type of human hybrid or humanoid. And there is also a set of bio-cybernetic life forms that keep heading towards extinction and trying to regenerate themselves. Just hold still. Keep breathing. If you have fear coming up, it's okay. It's not your fear. It is fear releasing through you to be purified. And you are purifying it with everyone right now in the purification space. If you have a dialogue in your head right now with lots of 4-lettered words or recognition, positive affirmation, whatever it is, just hold still. Neither accepting nor rejecting what is going on inside you, just holding still. You're doing brilliantly. It's good to open your eyes now, staying focused on your body. And Teresa and Stephen will now unpack a little bit of what I've just said. Just letting everything happen the way it is.
Tell us, Jacqueline, maybe let's go a little bit into the history, since you mentioned these 4 life forms. Can
Sure.
you tell us about where did they come from and how is this related to our genetics?
Yeah. Okay. Now, if this doesn't make sense to you, it's fine. If you don't believe it, it's absolutely fine. And if you find it quite difficult to deal with, that also is fine. What you need, you will take with you, and what you don't need, you can just forget about it. There are no extraterrestrials, but there is quite a mysterious, almost secret race under the earth here. And in order to understand what happened, we have to go back to the very beginning. Let's call them our creators. They were here on planet Earth and they made a replicant of their own selves because they kept sickening and dying. And eventually they had to leave because they couldn't survive. And their origins, in part, are connected with Sirius and Orion. The replicants that they left behind, they also had problems surviving on this surface. They were better adapted. But what happened was, as they got towards the end of their lifespan, their bodies started to fail. And so they became themselves involved with another genetic experiment with their own selves and with other beings that were already on this earth. And they created two races. One race that was very, very technologically advanced and had a great deal of technological know-how. And in the end, that is the variant that struggled the most to survive into the future. And slowly, as it developed, it lost its connection with the original beings, the creators who started off here. And towards the end of their lifespan, they were put in charge of the other genetic variant that had been created. And this genetic variant, in some ways, was very well adapted to Earth. But sometimes it really, really struggled to keep its ability to function in the light conditions of the planet. And so what happened was, in order to survive, that second variant went underneath the Earth's surface and started living underground and coming out at various times when the intensity of the stars and of the sun and the various conditions on Earth at that time didn't affect it so much. And it grew so used to actually being under the ground that it began to stay there. And towards the end of the lifespan of that second variant, it engaged in another genetic experiment. It interbred with the last of the first variant to try and create a kind of super species. And this super species, every so often, when it went back up above the ground, it would breed with the indigenous inhabitants on the Earth's surface that were nothing to do with the original creators. When it interbred with those indigenous beings on the Earth's surface, they left behind our early humans, or shall we say, our early humans which were a genetic variation of all of the experiments that had gone behind. So, to recap, there was a race underneath the ground that would periodically come up to the surface to interbreed with indigenous people on the surface of the Earth. And those beings underneath the Earth, some of them have still survived into the present day. And they have grown stronger over time, and they are attempting to come back above surface again. And the indigenous people above surface, that actually all of us are descended from time to time, they have had visitations from those beings underneath the surface. And as human history has developed, a whole strain of very unique human beings has emerged, some of which is closer to the beings under the ground, and some of which is closer to the original indigenous peoples on this planet. Keep breathing.
I want to just acknowledge to the people watching that we're aware that some of you are having audio issues. Most are not, it seems, that the issues seem to be coming from our side. We'll get a little closer to the microphone.
They can hear you fine, Jacqueline. We've heard.
Okay.
So that you know.
But anyway, I would suggest if you're having issues, not only check the volume on your computer, but check the little volume knob on YouTube itself. If you go to below the video, there may be all the way to the left next to where it says live, there's a little volume bar that may need some tweaking. But our connection is fine, and
Yes, and the connection is good here as well.
Okay. Well,
So just that.
Are you guys doing okay?
yeah, that is, I mean, based on things you've said before, that is quite a surprise. My understanding was that the negative high frequency beings were not physical, but it sounds like they are physical in a certain way here. And do they interact with certain people? Is there like a relationship between them and, call them the shadow controllers?
Yes, let me explain why the negative high frequency beings are actually disembodied as well as embodied, because this is a really great question. The negative high frequency beings, they exist underneath the earth in a kind of time-space continuum that issues in and out of the world that is connected with this planet. And because when they were breeding through the successive chain from the original creators that I talked about, because they were connected with a particular species that had a very high degree of technology, actually what they are doing underneath the ground is that they are broadcasting a type of technology, which I call the slave self, onto the surface of the earth, which then affects all of the beings on the surface world. And so in that sense, the negative high frequency beings are disembodied because they are in, if you like, a parallel stratum of this reality. And they are broadcasting emotions, thoughts, and attempting to influence the beings above the surface, because the beings above the surface already carry partially the genetics of those beings underneath the surface. And this is how they have started to grow in power. Remember that I said that one of the strains that went down through the progressive chain of genetic variants had real difficulty surviving here, and in the end lost most of the original creator DNA. It's had problems keeping a link with the beings above the surface and the body because it's lost that original DNA link. And so they have used technology more and more to influence the beings above surface to the point where those beings will become convinced that they need to take something into their body that will then glue them actually together with the life forms that created the technology, and of course the internet and all of the material technology negatively that we have in the world today, which will then help to glue the species above and below surface together more strongly. It's quite complex.
Yeah, I would say.
Have I answered your question completely? How it links to the shadow controllers?
Yes. I mean, every answer you're giving right now opens 20 other questions, but yes, that's clear.
For the people who haven't attended before or don't know my work well, so we have the negative high frequency beings, which is this event. They're beneath the surface. Above surface, we have shadow controllers and we have our leaders. The shadow controllers are the species of so-called human being, but they're actually a genetic variant, that are closest in their genetics to what's below the surface. And they're the ones in the corporations and the industries today behind, if you like, our normal government structures where our leaders reside. And they're the ones who have been manipulating and controlling to try and then, through usually money mechanisms, to get leaders to agree to and do certain things. Leaders on the whole are not very aware of what is going on Earth, and when they've become aware, if they have not gone along with what is being proposed for the next stage in the planetary historical story, they have been ruthlessly replaced. And that's why there are several different types of being on this earth. I mentioned that there are the humans in inverted commas who have more of the indigenous strain of genetics and less of the under the surface genetics. But there are also the humans who are closer in the genetics, that are what we call the more dangerous type of hybrid or humanoid. And then there are also the androids. The androids are a creation that have been made out of a synthetic version of the leaders who will not communicate what they are supposed to be communicating and will not cooperate. And they have been put in place of the leaders. They actually have a fair degree of material technology inside their bodies, but you can't actually tell. And they are controlled by technology. I hope everybody's still breathing. It's okay if this is not for you. You can leave the broadcast, or you can just decide to go along with it and then think about it later and not get too involved. It's up to you.
One quick follow-up on that. You had mentioned months ago about, I'll call him Vice President Biden, that he was in fact that he was a clone. That is this what you're referring to in the last piece of what you just shared?
Yes, the word clone is a little bit incendiary because it can mean different things in different contexts. But let's just say that a lot of our leaders have either been manipulated genetically, or there are a fair amount that have actually been replaced. And you only have to look at some of the broadcasts out there to see the difference in visual photograph between how they looked maybe a few years ago and how they look now. And yes, they will have had surgery, by the way, but it's what was taking place during that surgery. There's obviously cosmetic surgery, and then there's the type of surgery that starts to splice the human being with machinery or material technology. And by the way, have you ever wondered why there's such a prolific beauty industry on this earth? It's because the strains of humanoid above surface, who are the closest to the beings underneath the Earth's surface, have a problem with sun and with light. So they develop cosmetics and they develop many types of wonderful things to put on their face and on their body to keep themselves looking fairly normal and youthful, and in fact ever younger, because their secret weakness is that their genetics is failing. They are dying. And they need to take in external substances to keep their body going and to put things on their body to hide the breakdown of their visual appearance.
A lot more to unpack with that, which we're going to get to. I wanted to ask you before the time passed. You opened by saying there are no ETs. And I know you wanted to distinguish about what negative high frequency beings are and what they're not. We're getting some questions in the chat. Are these the reptilians, the Anunnakis, the Agarthans? So maybe this is a moment to talk a little bit more about what they are not.
Unfortunately, all these things have got a bit mixed up through the ages. And because of the under the surface dwellers, there are actually many, many other types of being now amongst us who have come in to join those undersurface dwellers, some of whom are positive and some of whom are negative. Okay? And just to explain, those whose genetics are closer to the technology types, they are the ones that have got called in our ancient historical literature archons. But actually archons refers to the mind contents that gets beamed into the so-called human above the surface and has no way of actually influencing reality until that stream of consciousness burrows down into the human body. You accept it as part of your technology of the slave self, as your identity, and then you start believing it and acting it out. And it's why all the world religions have had all of these different practices to try and separate from the mind, or to claim, if you like, the part of you that maybe is called free will but is actually part of the non-creator genetics, is more indigenous. The indigenous species here on Earth were nothing to do with the creators who turned up and are connected with these other places. So the conspiracy theories, there's some element in truth, but most of it actually isn't true. They are trying to convince you, quite a lot of those shadow controllers and actually the undersurface dwellers are trying to convince you that there is a dangerous race out there in the universe that might be coming back to get us, or that there are negative aliens stroke ETs existing in other dimensions who might be manipulating and controlling you, that are off planet. They're all on planet. They've always been here. They've been here for millennia. They're trying to throw a cloak over the presence of their own selves. Meanwhile, the very, very many positive beings, positive high frequency beings, they're all here too. That's us. So if you want to use the word ET, then, you know, everybody's an ET, everything's an ET. But actually it is a made-up name to try and throw everybody off the sense. And even the word alien, well, what do you really mean? It's better to use the word humanoid, which then covers a whole different range of human beings, which on the surface look the same, but are very different underneath the surface, and will have varying combinations of those different genetic variants that I talked about at the beginning. Some will be closer to the indigenous species on Earth, and others will be closer to what has happened since the under-Earth dwellers have come up and down onto the surface.
Nice, good follow-up really quick. There's a lot of discussion flying in the chat about the ETs. So just to distinguish a point, do you mean that there's no beings on other planets, or that what we're commonly told as the negative forces are not ETs?
Right. So the technology of the slave self convinces you that you are a body with density in a certain dimension. So if you accept that for a second, even though it's a false paradigm, then because you've already accepted the idea of density belonging to a certain dimension, that's where the idea then comes from of other dimensions and other beings in other dimensions, which we can call all sorts of labels, including extraterrestrials. I'm not saying that there aren't positive high frequency beings, but they don't actually exist in the way that you experience them if you are locked into the technology of the slave self. The technology of the slave self convinces you of all sorts of things, and that is part of the technology of the beings underneath the ground.
I want to be very sensitive about time. I know we have a lot to cover. It's 1:30. Do you want to move forward, or are there more questions we could pose?
Let's move forward, because we want to get in as many questions as possible, and we still have a few more mind-blowing revelations to come. So, everybody just zeroing in on your body, Just being very aware that you are sitting where you're sitting, listening where you're listening, that you have an external environment around you, and just get your geographical coordinates in relation to the space. In the purification space, you're only plugging into your own self. I emit a signal which is just a super strong signal of my own connecting into my own source connection. And according to what the instructions are that you have personally on board your own self, you pick up on that to the degree that is right for you and aligned with your own source connection. So there's nothing coming into you, there's nothing infecting you, there's no chance of you picking up anything from anyone else in the purification space. You are completely safe. And if this is not for you, you will just walk away, you will purify everything that is not to do with you and not right for you, and you will strengthen in your own self even more. So, ready for the next statement. So the beings above the surface of the earth, who are closest in genetics to the beings underneath the surface of the earth, they have in secret embarked on a genetic experiment with certain indigenous races on this planet, and they are using them to implement something called the New World Order. They have particularly zeroed in on different groups all over the world, not just in one location, that carry a very certain type of genetic signature which is able to pick up on technology. And then they have influenced those beings. They have actually bred a synthetic version of them. Still with me? Stay focused on your body. And because the characteristic of those new, more synthetic beings is that they like to think of themselves more collectively in a more socialist type of setup, and because all of those beings have great fears about their survival, particularly around food and water, they have kind of weaponized those beings to infiltrate politics and economics, to collapse our financial systems here on Earth, so that then the only remedy is for the places and peoples who are affected by that slow motion collapse to accept the new brand of technology that these beings have been developing. And these beings, of course, have very similar characteristics to the underworld dwellers. They want a secret sort of genetic elite that are implementing all of these programs, and then they want just a few beings left from everybody else, that would include the more indigenous strain, and they want them thoroughly enslaved, and actually they want to change their genetics so that everybody gets closer to the new synthetic life form. And that's why we have the circumstance that we have today on the planet. There is an attempt now to bring the world populations into a more singular genetic corridor, and also to make sure that the new human that comes out of the pathway of this splicing with technology and biology simply doesn't argue, doesn't feel very much, and just obeys. And this is a little bit like the model of what happened in the beginning when the original variants were bred, those two groups. One created the other to, if you like, do a lot of the things for the other party that they couldn't do. This is nothing to do with the Anunnaki, I nearly said myths, but it's not so close, not so far from that. It's nothing to do with the Anunnaki stories that we see in Sitchin and things like that. Slave workers digging for gold and all this kind of thing. It's nothing to do with this. That's a little bit of a mistake based on a modicum of truth. The central strand of truth is the theme of slavery and getting one genetic variation to do the bidding of another because the main party is biologically weak and is losing its power. Okay, that's the thing that you need to hold on to there. And you see the group of above surface organisms who have been targeted for this synthetic program. They all come from cultures where water has been a very big story, if you like, historically for them. Either water has been running out or it has been very dangerous, so they need to tame the natural forces. They were a natural choice for this selection program. They believe in hunger and scarcity, mainly because when you have a strong social collective program, if one is in danger, maybe all is in danger. And the more reptilian part of the brain is more active, if you like, in the scenarios where there's been a lot of starvation. And when they were all used then to create a new synthetic form, because they were quite disciplined and rigorous in their nature, because they would think of the collective rather than the individual, it was very easy then to roll out a set of instructions, both genetically and through technology, for them to go and find resources in other countries and other places, and also to go and find their own kin, if you like, genetically in other places, and then make this new world order become stronger and stronger. This is not about any one country against another, and it's not against any one political faction against each other. There are examples of these synthetic beings in all of the cultures and all of the political manifestations, and it's them who are either being, betraying their nation, or who are actually following, if you like, the ideas of a certain collective around them. And they are one syndicate across the world who are doing the bidding of these undersurface dwellers. Most of them are aware of it, not all of them are. Okay? And their job is not only to crash the financial system and to impose through technology, negative technology, a type of socialist system across the planet, but it's also to continue the genetic experiment. And by collecting everybody's DNA, which of course will happen through certain medical procedures, they can find more beings like themselves. And also, the ones who are also behind the scenes who are positive, they are actually also able to use the same technology when they get their hands on it to identify who is what. Because you see, there's a massive problem. Nobody knows who is what anymore on this planet. It's a mess. Let's just hold still again. It's weird and it's far out, I know, but it doesn't matter. Whatever's not correct, you will purify it. and whatever is correct, you will transmute it. That's the whole idea. And the purification space is for upgrading your own body so you hold the most positive high frequencies that you can, so you only ever are making decisions from your own source connection and your own purity and not any other type of genetic influence. You're all doing really fantastically. Staying aware of your body. If it's not making sense, it really will begin to make sense quite quickly. Very good. What questions do we have, Teresa and Stephen?
Well, you refer to technology,
Mm-hmm.
and I would like to understand more about that. I'm assuming that the V plays a very strong role in this, not only the one that is being introduced now, but perhaps even that whole system, number one. But number two, so I'd like for you to go into that a bit, but also the technology with which, these will be my words obviously, but like with which this signal is transmitted from underground to above ground that we're all, I guess, in receipt of. How do you have a sense of how that happens? How is that generated? Is there a device? Is there a series of devices? Are they located certain places? I mean, I would love to know more about that too. How does that come up? Because my sense is this is more than just infiltrating CNN and telling them what to say so that we hear it and our minds are programmed. There's something much bigger than that.
CNN and the, medicalization and all of that is really the end point of what I'm talking about. For me, although those things are very serious and very grave and very real, they're the end point and they're a little bit of a distraction from what I'm talking about here. When we're talking about technology, we're talking about the ability to replicate certain abilities from the original creators, who actually were fairly positive beings. Taking a lot of those abilities through the genetics of those two variant groups and then developing them into a type of technology which can self-replicate and brings in the whole scenario of what we call AI. Now, AI is not a negative thing. Actually, AI is a mimicry of nature and can be extremely positive, and in the future it will be. It will actually be the key to turning around all of this stuff. But this technology by these beings has been developed not only out of their own DNA, but also out of other things that are very hard to explain, that are a part of their own atomic setup, let's say, that is in them. And then they have developed material technologies which are able to put a fusion, if you like, of the original creators and themselves up into the skies. And then it speaks in a kind of language with the whole universe. And of course that can be for a positive or a negative reason, but it forms, if you like, a grid through the sky. And it rains down then on the planet, as well as beaming through the planet from below. And also, in the past, there have been certain mechanisms that have been inserted into the Earth's surface, where there is technology that picks up and amplifies these signals from above and below. So that's even before we get to, the invention of the TV, the invention of the radio, which are just the discoveries that the above surface dwellers made as a result of being influenced and poked and prodded by their below surface controllers and then brought into material manifestation in our history. And you've seen that also, because there have also been other types of genetic being who are able to access through, if you like, this subterranean, let's call it a portal, that have turned up or even have got dragged into Earth's electromagnetic field, its whole matrix of forces. That then you've also had the rubble and the leftovers of other types of technology that have turned up here, been reverse engineered by various different shadow controller projects, as well as the underground dwellers. And this is all glued together, and a kind of hybrid has resulted. And going back to what I said at the beginning about there being 4 different types of life form here, that type of life form, which is a kind of bio-cybernetic type of life form that in a way keeps heading towards its own extinction, that's an outreach of all of those different experimentations where they can't keep the life form going in the manner that the original creators were able to actually continue themselves after they left here. And those types of technology are very powerful, but they're not self-replicating, those ones. And they're a fusion of biology and machine, and they actually are the life forms of many different types of species that keep being discovered here and turning up, and then they don't last very long, and then they die. And if they get spliced in with the more indigenous life forms here, they create havoc with the genetics. And this is something that comes under the general label of nanotechnology. The satellites that are up in the sky that are part of that grid that I'm talking about, they're a type of nanosatellite. They're a biological organism spliced already with a type of technology that then rains down these signals onto Earth. And, chemtrails and things like this, as much as they some of them are raining down more of that kind of stuff to metallicize the human being, so it picks up more on these types of negative signal. Some of the chemtrails actually are very positive and are attempting to block out that influence. And every single thing that I'm mentioning here, there is a positive variation and a negative variation. So we can't say that any one type of body, being, technology is definitively bad or good. It depends whose hands it is in and who is controlling it. There are many positive high frequency beings who also have their hands on this technology and have their own technologies as well, who are above surface, and who have also satellites of their own design, which are, if you like, crafted to be able to mitigate these strong influences and try and cancel them out. There's all sorts of things going on this planet that the everyday person is not aware of. And that's the bigger picture that this sudden world crisis actually fits into.
Great. That's exactly where I wanted to pick up with some of the questions we're receiving. So you mentioned that some of these beings are aware of it and some are not. So we have a number of questions about, could I be one of these? But on the bigger, so could I be one of these? But on the bigger scale, in terms of addressing this plan and coming at it, is there purification possible among these beings? And is how we come together to address this, a sinister plan, is it about purifying those beings, or is it about the positive high frequency beings?
More to do with my third point. So I'm only going to answer some of the question now, so we get in a few more questions about this section as well. But just to say, remember that I said that these subterranean dwellers, they have a weakness. They're dying biologically. And they're making a last bid to try and take control, because the frequency of all the positive high frequency beings here is starting to take over. And now the negative future timeline has actually closed. So they are actually being forced down an extinction pathway. And all of the genetic variants that are hooked into their creation attempts and experiments and projects, including the synthetics, they're going to go with them. That's why I keep saying that there's, going to be quite a big exit on this earth, potentially, until all this is sorted out, because that life stream is no longer supported. So there's nothing to worry about. And that's why you're being given this information now, because if you like, the danger time is already past. You are purifying. And a lot of you have been in the purification space for quite some time, and especially if you were in the space from the beginning, you were definitely, even though you may not consciously have realized, a part of that deeper genetics which is thoroughly wired into those positive, very high frequencies. And if you're in this group, it's not possible even for you to get into this group and even join this group if you're not on a certain bandwidth. And even if it's not making sense to you, it just means that there's a part of you yet that is not quite grooved biologically with the full extent of your power to purify. And you're already doing that, but there's still so much more even of you to embody, because you are so highly multidimensional. So do you understand that even some of the people who are out there who are asleep, they are just as multidimensional as you? It's just that everybody is switching on at different times in different ways, according to your genetics and what splicing that you have in your body. And you see, that body is projected by the technology of the slave self. And once you purify to a certain point, you overwrite the slave self, and then you realize that you're actually multidimensional. And then this is when the whole house of cards starts to collapse on the physical. It's already collapsed on the other levels. We're just dealing with the physical level now, which is why you've seen the changes on the earth. So it's all great stuff. It's nothing to worry about, even though it's pretty scary.
Great.
Number of questions about geography. So there's a certain, I'm sure many people are wondering, and we've seen this come up, about kind of where on earth are these beings underground, and does that have any connection to like the ley lines and the structure, the organization of the energy grid, number one. And then is there, China seems to be coming up a lot for many people, and are they somehow involved in this in a deeper way than, say, other locations, or does that even matter?
Let's take the first point first, and then please remind me about the second one, okay? So, Earth has its own grid. And, that's neither positive nor negative. It just depends what happens to it. There are lines of, just like in our bodies, there are lines of a very sacred energy that run through the body of the earth and the body of the human being, while we still happen to be welded with it. And yes, of course, there are places on the surface that have been infiltrated and taken over. Most of these have been dismantled. There are a few that still remain active, but they are already on the sort of program that's heading towards that self-deletion of those negative influences. And as more of the negative high-frequency beings get transmuted, then so will the places above surface on the earth which have become entrapped or negatively coded deliberately. So there are only a few now. They are in the minority rather than the majority. And it's not really helpful to know too much about where those places were, because they've already gone. This is about the cleanup now, and about all of us taking our power and making the future the way it needs to be. And a very big feature of my work is to really focus on where we're going, because the doing and the being is the same thing. And the more you do that, the more you purify out everything that we're talking about. There are places on Earth also that have been deliberately set up to pipe in, if you like, huge currents of more transformative energies. I think it's very important to understand that every single bandwidth, has a positive and a negative potential. So there are high frequencies which are negative, and there are low frequencies which are negative. So by that I mean density. There are heavier forms which are positive and negative, and there are lighter, as in weight, frequencies which are positive and negative. And across the Earth's grid, there are places that both on the denser range and the lighter range are being set up to pipe in very positive bandwidths of energy within that spectrum itself where that density exists. And again, it's not useful to know where they are, because all that happens is that everybody starts going on pilgrimages to those places, and then they get desecrated. Or let's just say, or even that, they can perhaps even be tampered with because they come to the wrong type of attention. So yes, there are positive places as well as negative places. Those who are sensitive can tell and get drawn there. And then they, of course, just by being themselves, without getting into all of this ritual or trying to heal the earth or all that type of thing, they then add in their own frequencies to those points, and they will then step up earth even more to a higher level. And that's what keeps them pulling out all of these negative influences beneath the surface and in the genetics of every single being. Every single being on Earth has got a little bit of the negative high frequency beings within. Everybody. Absolutely everybody. Okay, there are no exceptions. So there are no saints. And actually there are no sinners in the religious sense either, because those are categories that either move towards the absolute evil or the absolute purity. We're not talking about those ideas here. Everybody's got a little bit of that inside them. But then when you come to genetics, which is about the carrier and how the source connection, the wiring is actually set up for the type of signal that you then start to operate on, that's a slightly different area. You can either be an antenna for those negative high frequency beings or not, and that will be influenced in part by how much of that you've actually got in your genetics in the first place. So it's within and without. Okay, but nobody needs to worry about having so much of that inside them that they are a problem, or that's the reason why their life is terrible. Actually, in this space, there is nothing like that even operating. It's not even possible. That's more in other spaces in the surface world.
Part two.
Let's do a quick check-in before I do part two, just keeping an eye on the space. Very good. This is okay, right? Actually, for a lot of people in this space, this is just what you've been expecting, it seems to me. Maybe you didn't know all the details, but it's like ding, 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 because you see the information is already inside you. I'm not telling you anything new. It's already there in your own data that you brought with you into this incarnation. It's coded into you. And the purification space just exposes you to all of who you are already. So, and that's the good and the so-called bad. If you have loads of stuff come up, well, it was there already. Okay. And that's not a problem, because it's passing through you and releasing, because you're a purifier. And if you recognize, a lot of this information suddenly, it's not because I'm telling it to you for the first time. You've always known, but you haven't quite been able to articulate it. And I'm just switching it back on and joining up the dots for you. That's all. And that's also why I'm not particularly useful or important, beyond the point where, you are then switched on. And that's why you're able to be entirely independent of me, as well as still operate freely in my proximity. You don't need me, because you've got it all anyway. And then together we become this beautiful symphony where we bring each other out even more strongly, and everybody else on earth as well. And that's what the purification space is for. So that second question was about China, I think, yeah?
It was, but I think you covered it. You kind of enveloped it in what you just spoke about, and I think it's the kind of thing that maybe we could talk about in the end portion where we
Sure, okay.
general questions. But maybe we move forward now to section 3.
Okay, sure. So, everybody sitting very comfortably, listening, or whatever you're doing right now, staying focused on your body. Remember that you are the purification. We don't have to have any special methods or techniques here in the purification space. You're already doing it more and more and more. And because you're being who you actually are, you are stripping out the genetics that then creates an anchor for any type of slave self technology, any type of negative high frequency being in yourself or in others. And in your case, there will be very little of the negative high frequency being in you. In everyone in the purification space, there is less than 3% negative high frequency being. Okay? So no deluging Jacqueline with inquiries about whether you are a negative high frequency being. Okay? So just holding still. Being aware of your body, no need to change anything. Registering your sense of self. So, I am from the future. I wasn't born here, and nor were you. The technology of the slave self has given you the experience of coming through the birth canal of your biological mother, and you have a relationship with a biological being on this planet who you call your mother or father. And all of those things are true, but only within a certain reality. You are multi-dimensional beings. You are the positive high frequency beings. If we go back to that statement about there not being any extraterrestrials, if you insist on using that word from the old order, the old system version of this planet, you are the ETs. But actually everybody is a genetic hybrid mix. And all of that is part of the slave self technology. I am not one of the 4 types of life form either on this planet. I am a special design. And actually, I developed and I grew that special design because it was my wish to come here and to show that multidimensionality that we all are to everyone, actually including myself, through the technology of the slave self system, to destroy it from the inside out. So I have information locked inside of me that I don't even know myself until it comes out of my mouth. That's why I'm nicknamed this Oracle Girl. It's also why I myself was switched on at a certain time in my life by a female oracle externally in another country in the world, namely Tibet. I am a composite blend of all the different 4 types of biology or life form here, plus something extra. And that's called the new embodied human. And that's where this planet is going. It's already well down that trajectory. Everybody in the purification space has been helping to make that happen, whether they've realized it or not. And it is the power of our connection, nothing to do with the original creators, who are all to do with the design of the body. It is our power in direct connection with the spark of infinity inside us, which is also upgrading nature, our own body, and bringing forward what I call nature's world order. And that order is the principles of nature combined with the fact that we are dreamers. The last reboot group was about this in preparation for the space today. Every single event leads on to the next one, of course. And as we bring up the frequency and the bandwidth of this planet and everybody else, everyone is going to wake up here and start to throw off the slave self technology. And also, the sun, in concert, which actually is a type of star, the sun in concert with the other celestial beings or bodies that are around this planet, are going to bring more and more natural disasters and happenings on this planet, which are going to take all the technology out. The positive technology, because it is within the ingenuity and the life force of positive high frequency beings, will not be affected, but the negative will. And the technology that's up in the skies, all those nano satellites and this kind of thing, which are autonomous and more self-regulating and have actually taken off on their own trajectory, they will be overwritten by the technology that we have as new embodied humans, which is the ultimate technology. And that was the subject of the radio interview just recently with UK Health Radio. And a little bit like I told you during the immersion, I have already been through a set of experiences where this has happened somewhere else, and that was overcome. And during the silent immersion, I explained to you how that was achieved. So let's just hold still there. Everybody is doing so well. Thank you for placing your trust in this space to join today, for that recognition of who you are. Whatever's coming up, just letting it be. Whatever's going on in your body, it doesn't really matter. Don't make it into a story. It's just a purification. Excellent. Well, back to you, Teresa and Stephen.
You said a minute ago that something to the effect of doing and being are the same thing. And I'm curious about the new human technology, the new embodied human. Where does that meet, the elevation of frequency? Where does that meet what we do in terms of standing up as physical actions against the, current agenda? What do we need to do? And you said in the supermoon just do your best, it is enough. So I think that gives a lot of relief to people.
That's a great starting point, isn't it? Because you see, you're already on the frequency that is purifying and overturning. It's a brilliant plan. I mean, you know, the thing is that you masterminded it and you don't even realize, because from within the perspective of the slave self, we experience ourselves a bit like those underneath the surface, as biologically weak, and as though we are powerless and we are not able to triumph at anything. That is the superimposition of that technology on your multidimensional self, by the way. So whenever you're getting into trying to sort out certain things based on all of this mind contents and emotionality that's telling you you're deficient, you're this or that, that is the technology of the negative high frequency beings. And then all of our structures, if you like, you know, through religion and economics and politics, they have then all welded together over the top, made out of all of those technological signals. It's a brilliant, absolutely brilliant strategy in a way, because all you've got to do is be yourself. You will keep on transmitting at this higher and higher frequency because you are overwriting all of that technology. But then it's a lot more than that. As dreamers, we become part of the material context of nature, and we can then take it further. So this is not about sitting around and waiting until, you know, there's some natural disaster that takes out everything that's happening on the planet. Or it's not about, you know, thinking, oh, well, I'm purifying all the time, so I can just lie in bed and watch Netflix. This is more about actively engaging and noticing the signals in your body which speed you up, give you passion and excitement, and exploiting them to the hilt. And you will find that in this time, those opportunities open up for you. Because as the frequency rises, it's those things that are more possible on the future positive timeline that is now taking root on this planet. So actually, you guys have got so much to do. You have got to get into rebuilding this planet. And you are actually in concert with nature. You are listening to the signals within, obeying them and aligning with them ever more deeply, knowing that you are purifying while you're doing that. So there will always be a mixture of slave self and the positivity of you in there, which is getting sorted out while you go through that process. So no worries about that small amount of you, which is still part of the slave self, because that needs to be in there, right? Because otherwise it won't get dismantled through the process of you actively rebuilding your societies. And you guys have got to jump now and leap into this new future where your own instructions inside give you that dream, that excitement of what it is that you would like to see, and you try to make it happen. And you see, the ingredients of your success are already around you. If you can't find it already around you, that isn't it. It's there in your immediate context. So it could be as seemingly small or insignificant as just helping to fix some very small personal difficulty between you and another person in an everyday situation. But that is where suddenly you develop a passion for actually building a bond of affection or changing a certain practical scenario that has been holding back a lot of people or yourself or that other person. Your passion will show up in your immediate context. And so it's not about being movie stars and all of that other stuff that gets projected on you outside. You've all each been given a little bit of all of the interconnections to deal with, so that you perfect that in your own way according to the instructions inside you, so that then all of that joins up through the gold frequency, which is the interconnection that all of us are joined by. And we all then do that little bit for each other. We are all in it together. So you just stick to the bit that is yours, because you're doing that for you and everybody else. And then that ripples in, and through the feedback, you actually get the beauty of everything that everybody else is purifying and reconciling and rebuilding in their area. You haven't got to do that bit because they're doing it for you. And so it all goes up together. So it's not even really about what do we do, because it's the slave self that actually asks that question, that needs to be told, because that's the old model of you're weak, you must obey. There's a set of instructions out there, and until you've learnt them, you're not entitled to or even qualified to do that. That's all of that external weakness hierarchical system that comes from those biological weaklings beneath the surface. Okay. During the immersion, I did talk about 4 sort of things that I did experience myself, that have happened elsewhere, that have overturned what has gone on. We will actually publish the silent immersion as a booklet towards the end of the year or early next year for those who want to get deeper into that. But dreaming is the main key, and also the putting into the right place of deductive reasoning. Reasoning and logic are wonderful things and extremely important for the future, especially in terms of positive technology. And positive AI will actually be the major thing that changes the future. And I will explain a little bit more of that in the future. But that must be a servant to positive high frequencies. Okay? And when we dream, actually, we start to infuse our whole personal field with how we want to feel and how we do feel when we already lock into the material reality of having achieved something that feels so right to us. And then we actually pull all of our external world into that timeline, and we, through our experience with the body, work out how to make it real. For that, we don't need deductive reasoning. We have to actually move into our dreaming apparatus and our ultimate body technology, which is about the new embodied human. And we are sculpting and actually making reality take form and shape in the way that we need it to, according to making it match what we already have on board with us when we dream. We don't use deductive reasoning for that. We don't work out how to get somewhere in the future. We actually are the future in reverse polarity. We materialize that through our body apparatus as a built-up antenna of signals, and then we mold our reality to sink in and fit it. That's how we go about rebuilding our societies. And then we use our deductive reasoning for the training of positive AI to actually, from the outside in, delete the remaining genetic frequencies on this planet that can pick up still on the negative high frequency beings. Those are additional pieces of technology, positive, healthy technology, that will be used to change the human body out of the type of very dangerous and anti-human type of genetics, let's just say, and that will mend genetics and enable us to then embody much higher signals. And that's a bolt-on. It's secondary to the ultimate technology of the human. So material technology and the ultimate body technology of the new embodied human will work together in the future, as well as a very strong impulse from all positive high frequency beings to actively start saying no. Everybody's going to start doing that on the planet. It will be quite amazing when we start seeing it. It won't be pretty. It will be painful, but it will come. And that's part of the guaranteed positive future timeline. The guaranteed positive future timeline is not peace, love and bliss, I'm afraid. That does come a little bit later. But the positive future timeline is getting this shit sorted out. and that does not feel comfortable. Okay? Is that a good answer to the question?
Yes.
Yes.
I kind of want to pick up where you just ended about the timeline. We had a few questions come in advance about, I think recently you talked about a 12 to 14 month kind of period versus say a 5 to 7 year period. And where's your sense of where we are vis-a-vis those two at this moment? And then B, what is needed to get onto that more accelerated path?
Let's remember that it's shifting and changing all of the time. This is not about what happens in the politics, in the outside world. There's still a lot of people who are judging the positive future timeline by how much they're hearing about something that they want to see happening in the politics, in the outside world. It just isn't like that. You're getting your read off of your internal body apparatus, and you must get it there. That's the whole point. Otherwise, you're back in the whole media world, because the politics and the economics, they're all part of that same frequency. You're not going to get a read on the accuracy of what's happening from the external world for quite some while. But isn't that brilliant? Because the only read you're going to have is through your own source connection. And that's what this is all about. And your source connection, as you purify, it is changing the timeline or the nature of the form of the positive timeline every single minute and every single day. Sometimes it gets longer to the point where there's none of this mask shit going on, and then sometimes it then comes back in again while something else is getting sorted out. There's lots of different variants at the moment that are getting integrated and sorted out. And then you've got all the crazies on the outside as well doing all their stuff as well, which are pulling it backwards and forwards as they implode and go into self-destruct as well. So I actually give quite a razor-sharp analysis of this in the David Kahn's interview, which will be published on the 27th. It is part of the Karmic Delete, Part 7. But what I will say now is that the timeline, because it has gone quicker in a certain very significant area in the last couple of months, the timeline will be more radical and more difficult and briefer in the new year. And then that will affect whether we get a shortening of a lengthening of the 9-month period after February and March. Okay? The longer timeline is approximately 5 years. It's easier. But there's more loss of life. And everything on the positive future timeline always tries to minimize loss of life, because that's the principle of nature. There are always some things that go into deletion and out of circulation in nature, however nice or fluffy they look on the outside. But nature in general moves towards higher and higher expressions of itself, as is the new human, the new embodied human.
Can you say more, Jacqueline, about what you just talked about related to the role of the sun, and possibly how this relates to the celestial events happening right now, and what you said in the newsletter this week about this 7-day period and the next few days, what has been infiltrating this planet will no longer have anywhere to hide?
Well, the solar eclipse on the 14th was absolutely massive, first of all. It really was a massive, massive time in our history, because that's when the negative timeline actually closed. And the negative timeline is obviously that, these negative high frequency beings would succeed in completely taking over body form above the surface and succeed with a complete wipeout of the positive high frequencies. And that total solar eclipse, there's no coincidence that, for example, we had Google outages that day. Everything, was hooked up. You can even see, in the politics externally, a partial mirror of the balance of forces. If you look in America with the election process, uncovering, the massive manipulation of the electoral process, and then it not going to the Supreme Court, or maybe it will. This sort of backwards and forwards between two forces that are trying to vie for which one will become, the one that takes over. And by the way, whichever president that we get in the States, it doesn't matter, because it's all part of that same machinery, which is to do with the new world order and not nature's world order. So that's going to all implode whichever way it goes, okay? So, it's not Trump versus Biden, and it's not China versus America or any of those things. This is a more conspiracy theory area, which has a few partial truths, but really is not complex enough, not incisive enough in its analysis. Okay, does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay, I just want to check that I haven't lost the thread of what you ask.
If we can just stay in the heavens for a moment, what role, if any, does the moon play in this entire story you're sharing with us, and the sun too? Like, what are their parts in this?
I love these questions. So I will say a little bit more about the sun first in order to elaborate on the moon. The sun is a star, and the sun has got a finite timeline. And the sun may even suck in Earth and destroy it at some point in the future, long after we've, been here. But Earth is definitely heading towards a termination event at some point. It will be rebirthed. There's nothing to worry about, but like all planets, it comes to its own, nemesis and transformation at a certain point. And the sun, is the atomic part of our own being that is outside of the construction of the slave self. Actually, those of us who are already fully multi-dimensional, we have a sort of mock-up of the sun in the core of our being. And so the core of our intelligence, which isn't really biological, it will be a certain atomic setup that's linked to the sun. So, for example, my full multi-dimensional self, the core of me is argon. It is a type of material that is hooked in with the composition of the sun. I won't go too far down that rabbit hole, because I think I might fry people. I might fry myself as well. But the sun is part of what burns in all beings, and actually is the interconnection between the gold frequency and pure love as well. If you were to look for a physical materialization of that in nature, then this is why the sun has been worshipped so much, for the wrong ideas, but for the right sensibility, you might say. It's great to do, sun salutations and hymns to the sun and stuff like that. But from the perspective of the slave self, it's only really going to achieve that much. But on the broader, sort of bigger picture of everything, the sun is the part of ourselves that really bridges straight back into the infinite spark, and is able then to anchor pure love back into this reality. So then you come to the moon. The moon is almost like, in the old tales, you've got the sun and you've got the moon, and we've got yin and we've got yang and all that kind of thing. It's not really very true. I mean, there used to be more than one moon attached to Earth, and, Earth was formed out of a whole set of collisions of meteors and planets anyway, and there were many moons involved in that. But let's just say that the moon is it's a little bit of a tricky one, because the moon has been taken over, let's say, by some of the negative high frequency beings, and some of that satellite technology that I was talking about earlier. Some of it has been designed to keep an eye on the moon. Some of it actually has been designed to get Earth into more of the warp speed of the moon and increase the negative high frequency being influence through technology onto surface dwellers. There's always the positive and negative side of it. Again, this is quite complex. But the moon in general was sort of, let's say it maneuvered into the skies in collaboration with Earth at a certain point of history and wasn't always there.
A lot of interest, and we were about to go there ourselves. Can you talk more about the great conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter coming up? And what does this have to do with the shifting of the ages and the shifts we're speaking about?
Actually, it's all to do with Sirius, really. And, you know, to go back to that question about, you know, going up to the 22nd. So the positive timeline came in fully into material place, if you like, on the 14th. We're sort of in that kindergarten stage of standing up wobbly on our feet, and suddenly humanity is beginning to realize that there's been a whole attempt to push your attention towards something medical, which, if you like, is the outgrowth of something which is much bigger that nobody really wants you to know too much about. Because when most people find out about this, and it will come out in some way in our lifetime, there is going to be a complete and utter meltdown. But that's what we need, right, to break all the control. So going up to the 22nd, this is the point where you're actually on the 22nd, you are coming into a whole new corridor of the ability to claim your own ownership of this new Earth and this new bandwidth for Earth, which actually you have brought about. It's a meeting of your own selves in the center of the sun, if you like, on this planet. And it's a chance for you to activate your own claiming of the Earth as, if you like, not a world order or anything sinister like that, but as the place that you want it to be, in one recognition of the fact that actually it belongs to all of us and it's ours, rather than something or someone else's. So the 22nd is a very galactic moment where, if you like, all the universes are coming together in one point in time, and where everybody is able to stand up and say, I want this, I don't want that. And this place, actually, it's mine and it's ours. It doesn't belong to this. And now I'm going to start going my own way. And this is what the common values are, if you like, that I think should be here. We're moving into a phase which is not particularly political, but where people start to really author their own citizens' charter, if you like, not in a way like, you know, natural law or common law or legal processes that you see out there. Not so much like that, although that will be involved as well. It's more like nature communicating through us from the inside out. This is the way it fucking is. Life is precious. It should not be harmed. The freedom to choose and to have free speech, well, you know, the wind blows and nature's roar is getting louder and louder. It's taking over and putting all of us back in under its wings, if you like, so that then we re-emerge through it along the right trajectory. And the 22nd, if you like, is a phenomenal rebirth through the core, really, of our own solar system, actually. To put it very prosaically, it sounds a little bit too metaphysical. It's actually very solid and very practical, because you can really sum it up in a certain way that your inner one finger is coming up strongly. Okay?
All right.
Well, we're at around half past the second hour. Shall we shift into kind of just more Q&A from...
I think so, because we want to get in as many people as we can, don't we? And I mean, we've already answered a great deal, which is cool.
Yeah, so many of the questions that we had ready to ask that were submitted, so.
Yeah.
Let's just do a 10-second pause here. Still just making sure you can feel your own self. It's a lot to digest, I know, even if you knew it all, which you did. My hand is just moving spontaneously. It's not actually affecting or making anything happen. It's actually just expressing what's already happening and what you're doing as the purification. You guys are really so amazing. Okay, let's have some questions.
Okay. This one was submitted through the sign-up process. Was the legal entity called the corporation created by the negative high frequency beings?
Yes.
Everything about the corporation seems antithetical to integrity, equality, health, bonds of affection, etc. Mustn't we eliminate this toxic legal fairy tale and come up with some new structures for doing business?
Well, we will come up with new structures, you know, all the way through. I mean, a corporation can be a positive thing, but of course its inception is part of that slave self system. And it's you know, it's I believe it's a very political and economic, you know, clever mechanism, which, you know, now so many people are seeing through and realizing that there's two sides to the same coin, and that actually there's a whole way of practically going about life in society where you may not be subject to a lot of the things that you're told that you're not. And that's an area that, you know, according to whether it's your path or not, you can get involved in, as well as purification, of course.
Very good.
Number of people in the chat are asking, can you speak about Uluru and the magic box, which needs many of us to help activate?
Yeah. Well, is this... Yeah, I don't want to rain on your parade, guys, but you know, no one place on this Earth surface is more important at any one time than another. And although we all have a deep relationship with different parts of the Earth's grid, I mean, especially because we were born in a certain place, and when we purify the slave self, actually the last stage of that is that we purify the place that, partially the place that we were born, apparently, as well. But, you know, this is all part of this whole thing about how we need to help the Earth, or we need to do certain things to perhaps, you know, facilitate a positive future. There is a positive future. What you need to do is really live your own path and not get too pulled into lots of other things that distract you. I'm not saying that doing this thing for Uluru is a distraction at all. You know, I'm sure it's a very wonderful and a great thing, but make sure that it's in the right order in your own life. Make sure that you are attending to who you are and your own life as the prime thing, and then anything you do will be wonderful and positive and will be taken along with your positive high frequency as well. But make sure that nothing that you're engaging with of that type or anything else is a kind of, you know, if I don't do this, then that won't happen. Because then it's definitely a negative slave self projection. Okay, and you know, Uluru, boy, it must be sick of the number of things that have been done in its name. I'm not saying that all of the things that have been done in its name are negative, but some of them really are. You know, fixating on certain parts of the natural scenery is a bit like sort of, you know, starting to worship, you know, your own big toe or something as the key to something. We need to be very careful not to fetishize or over-ritualize or commoditize nature. Nature never asks for that, doesn't need it. Nature's fine, actually. It's us that's not fine, if you want to make a comparison relatively. Okay?
Yeah, perfect. Because you've brought up, you've used this wonderful replacement acronym NWO for Nature's World Order. And I'd like to kind of explore that. And I think this question submitted ahead of time helps us do so, because one could hear that and turn that into any manner of thing. And so maybe you could describe exactly what that means, or in general what that means. But this question, I think, kind of helps illustrate that. Dear Jacqueline, could you please talk about the connection with nature in the sense of what it means that the world must return to the way of nature? Is it that we connect to the cycle of the moon? In the end of year in Celtic and Germanic culture, there are many feasts, and the days after the winter solstice to Christmas and to the 6th of January are considered a portal between worlds. Is this still valid, or is it part of the box in which the slave self lives? Thank you very much.
It's valid, but only within a certain broader context. We will really go deeply into this during Karmic Delete 7. Because that event is called Nature's World Order, okay? But nature's principles are about the push and the pull and the torsion of forces inside your own personal field as you seek to ensure that you never censor your own self, and that as a purifier, you are always bringing up the stuff that needs to be deleted through your direct interaction, pragmatically and practically, with this world. That's the center of returning to the way of nature, okay? Nature works in certain ways. Nature will grow, the ivy grows around something if there's something in the way, if it's trying to find the right way to go. And nature will actually, like the salmon, swim upstream in order to obey its biological imperative. Okay, these are forces and currents that register through the body and which actually put you more deeply in touch with the spark of infinity, which of course you are outside of the slave self. And it's that I am talking about, not something that's then become bound up as an expression of nature through a human social or cultural activity. The cycles of nature, of course, are extremely important and are part of nature's principles within you. But then what human beings have done with that and then encoded into a calendar or into religion will only be as powerful and as positive and as beneficial as the frequency of the person taking part of them. And again, it should be second to you actually living and being who you are, rather than taking on these things in order to make yourself into who you truly are, which is a synthetic type of expression of human nature, which is all bound up with religion and hierarchy. There won't be much of religion and politics and economics left in the future. Just the core things that always were pure. And then we will reinvent that and replace that, and it will be us. So all that's going to go in a way, and how much you continue to do those things will be according to the signaling within you, rather than this, I'm a certain type of being, so I must go and do this on this date.
You've mentioned that both the chakra system and the soul are no longer relevant to the human. Can you please elaborate on this and say what it is that persists when the body drops, if it's not a soul?
The spark, the infinity spark. And it's not really even a persistence, it's a beautiful song that ebbs and flows. You know, all this stuff about the chakras, you see, that's all part of the design of the body and the creation of the body and its genetics. And the chakra system is just the hallmark, if you like, of the particular races that were involved with certain cultural designs of body. And sort of trying to then project that onto the whole of the enormous variance of humanoids on this planet's surface is kind of silly in a way, in the most innocent way. I don't mean to be derogatory. It only applies to some types of genetics, and now that the human body is starting to upgrade and change, it's irrelevant. It's a good model, if you like, for thinking about your body in certain intelligent ways, but it's just a tool. It's not really a universal reality or a spiritual truth. Impossible.
Quite a few questions coming through about this topic. Do the negative high frequency beings have anything to do with global human trafficking and sexual ritual, child abuse, and blood sacrifice, children kept and harvested in DUM dums?
Yes.
Places.
Although let's be clear on this. Some of that is in the realm of conspiracy theory, and some of it is true. And there has also been a very strong political movement in the wake of the American election to make more religious the dialogue between good and evil, and then project it on to political counterparts. And then the good guys are trying to save all of the kids who are being abused by the Luciferic kind of tendencies. This is a blown up projection of religious ideas superimposed back on a political process. Meanwhile, negative high frequency beings, because they have a biological and a genetic weakness, they suffer with light and with skin a great deal. And because they need to supplement their biology, then they do use certain things for that supplement. The worship of satanic or dark energies, this is all going on within the projection of the slave self, more in the level of shadow controllers and leaders who are being sort of corralled into certain behaviors so that then their emotions and their life force helps to glue together those who are below the surface and above the surface, so this gluing together of biology and technology can come about more quickly. So it's quite complex. Some of it is true, some of it isn't. Okay. There's been a big attempt also to throw a kind of Luciferian cloak over certain people and certain activities to distract away from other agendas. Meanwhile, there are those agendas and activities going on as well elsewhere, above and below surface.
Does what we consume in the way of food and drink affect our susceptibility to the influence of negative high frequency beings? You tell us to hydrate well on the day of a purification, drinking only water, not even tea. Why is this?
Yeah. Okay, so first of all, on the day of a purification, most people are chronically dehydrated. And it's important for your body to be hydrated so that you release toxins well, so they don't get stuck in your body, so that you conduct as pure a signal as possible and pick up as strongly on your own source connection wiring and not on others. It's just a very practical and pragmatic thing. No, I mean, if your diet was the key to the universe and, Oreo biscuits were going to save us from negative high frequency beings, we all would have invested long ago. But, humor aside, of course, your diet does affect your biology, but it's only one very small factor. It's an important factor, but actually it's all to do with your frequency and whether your self-healing ability has switched on. If your self-healing ability is not switched on and you're not in that high frequency range, to be honest with you, you are just going to obey the pathway of your genetics according to the slave self, however much good superfood you put in there. It's not going to make an awful lot of difference. It's about your actual frequency and your biology. And that's what I mean, by the way, by, the purification space is protection. I don't mean protection in sort of this kind of thing, getting rid of the entities. That's religious. It's because it goes back into this kind of, you're at the mercy of something because you're weaker. kind of idea. Your protection is your frequency, because as you push out this very, very high positive frequency that purifies and transmutes, you are able to then slowly overturn whatever it is denser or heavier or might pull you into another range of being. And when you get to that stage, you have a confidence and a knowing. You can't really say, if you don't know yourself, then almost certainly it isn't there. Okay. And this is the whole thing, this is not a nice tick box exercise where you can go, oh, right, okay, deleted the slave self, then embodied the new embodied future, now I'm a dreamer, and next I'm going to see new realities. It's not like that. A lot of the time you don't know, but your body apparatus is functioning on a certain frequency, and you are starting to overturn what's around you, and you start to notice that what you are feeling actually on the inside is an accurate match for then what you read off of the outside. So it's nothing to do with form or whether you get what you want from your cosmic ordering service. It's not that kind of thing. It's more about the match and the alignment between internal and outer, and that you can healthily control that reality for yourself and never lose your own sense of self. These higher frequencies and the purification space are giving you part of that frequency which upgrades your biology, which means that these other things that are going on, you can navigate them. You have the force of nature as your actual integral being. You move with it, and you are able then to shape your environment as much as you are informed by your environment. And it becomes that true expression of yin and yang, rather that more sort of nebulous interpretation that you sometimes find, which is a little bit passive, which is just go with the flow. It's a synthesizing of the two as the human being, active and passive, and they mean and become exactly the same thing rather than these two poles.
You have spoken quite a bit recently about biological upgrades specifically, and I wonder if you could kind of get into that a little bit. Is it like what exactly is happening to the body, and what kind of capacity does that provide?
Well, we're going to find out because the human being actually in its new biological expression is so powerful, it's capable of many things that we're not even aware of yet, but certainly it's going to be a full multi-dimensional type of expression. But the fact that everybody is already making happen what is happening on this planet right now is just one example of what this new biology is capable of, what we're actually doing and achieving right now. And beyond that, it will be what we decide. If we claim this world space now, this world society as our own, as a collective, rather than the type of collectivity that we see being rolled out in the world right now that is more negative and harmful, if we focus there now, we will switch on even more of what our biology has to offer, where we will be not only creating more healthy technologies to use in concert with our biology, but we will actually rewrite, all of the AI sequencing on the planet to actually self-replicate only pure love. That's the way it's going to go. But that's even the realm of sci-fi a little bit for us at the moment. But what about an algorithm that writes pure love everywhere where it touches biology? That's what's coming, and that's what we're about. That's where I came from.
Wow. We had some questions based on your newsletter about how do we claim it? How do we claim it as our own? You just mentioned it again.
Just sign up for the event on the 22nd. We're going to do it. It's as simple as that, basically. But through your everyday life, stop censoring yourself. Everything around you is a paper thin rendition of an old order which is leaving. The quicker now everybody takes their power, the quicker it's going to be over. Simple as that.
A couple of these might be yes/no questions, so I'm going to lump them
Sure.
together because I know we're running out of time.
No problem. We've done well.
Yes, we have. A friend is afraid that he's been genetically modified or tagged through C testing. Is testing for C a form of inoculation tagging, and is it successful in manipulation of the genes?
Of course. That's what all that medicalization is about. It has to be something that gets into your, the whole area, the whole spectrum of your DNA, because, there is a search for certain types of genetics and certain types of genetic being on the planet right now, and that will show up through the testing. And there's an attempt to reduce the number of beings on the planet who have more of the indigenous strain and less of the other types of biology we've been talking about. And there's also a wish to upgrade and intensify the type of genetics that are this elite, genetic class that will marry together with the subterranean beings. So all of that is part of that area. And I've been saying this for quite a while, it's your choice.
And the other one is a certain number and a certain letter about the controlling slave self technology.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
A couple questions related to this that I'm going to try to consolidate. But basically, you asked us to save seeds last May.
Oh, yes.
And
I said it's time. Yes.
one person said, and I went out and bought a huge freezer. So given where we are now with the patterns and some of the ugliness that may be to come, what's the best way you would say to prepare now?
Listen to yourselves and don't ignore your instincts. And if you're still asking outwardly, start asking more from your own self, because you're being told. The answers aren't outside you. Isn't this the whole lesson of what we're going through? And it's just common sense, isn't it? If all this, whether, it is a short or a long trajectory, if all of this is sorting itself out there, you are always going to get some type of trouble somewhere in some pocket of the world, which, because we're so interconnected, affects everything else. So be wise, be sensible, and stop looking for the answers outside yourself. Just get on with it. You already know.
We have about 2 minutes till the close of 2 hours. Do you want to kind of wrap this up, or should we?
I think so. I think that everybody has done incredibly well, and now it would be a great thing to really finish off together in the space. Just remaining completely aware of your own self. No need to change it. You're doing it. Purification today, 2 hours long, an exceptional degree of intensity. It's going to shape you and inform you. It's all just going to roll out. So just go ahead and enjoy it, grasp it, seize the day, as they say. Be yourself. This planet is changing. It must happen. The old order is over. Everything you see is because it is dying and it is weak and it is leaving. Make sure that it doesn't stay. any longer than needed. By obeying the force of nature within you, dreaming and leaping into that new expression of yourself that flourishes, shows and says everything that you are unrestrainedly. See you on the 22nd. Don't forget your aftercare, please. Very strong, all of these sessions, and they will continue through the end of the year. We've got some great stuff lined up to support everyone. Karmic Delete will be devoted now to the further intense, accelerated delete of negative high frequency beings. The first one, Karmic Delete 7, starts on the 27th. And then we have all the good stuff about the new money with Elira on the 29th. And last of all, on the last day of every month from now on, you can sign up at any point during the month with all of your questions, anything that you would like answered. I'm going to round up anything that doesn't get answered in the other events as much as I possibly can. And I am also going to give you a kind of practical roundup for the month ahead and really go deeply into an area of more the technicalities of the practical stuff that you need to be doing to embody who you are related to the aftercare. Lots and lots of questions and answers, and it's your kind of little lift at the end of each month and a good cleanup to really leap you into the next month. It's going to be intense in January because of course there's the inauguration and a good deal other things as well, so do sign up for that. Of course, we will be purifying some more areas of the planet in January. I wonder if you can guess which country will be first on the list.
Well, thank you so much for including us in this amazing session.
Thank you, guys.
Pretty amazing for both of us. And I hope for the people out there, we did our best with your questions. There were a lot that came through. We tried to lump some together, but I think everything that was covered was
perfect,
extraordinary. And if you want to get connected with us, there's a little information below the video. We have a little Facebook community where I'm sure there will be a very excited discussion about these topics. So join that if you like. But otherwise, very, very grateful and humbled to be a part of this.
Much love to all of you. Keep going, and I will see you all again very soon. Bye-bye.